I've been trying to make a video about this book for months. I read it, I thought, okay, I can do this. And then 8 months passed and I still haven't been able to get my thoughts into a video. I still haven't found a way to express how I feel. So I threw in my notes and we're starting again. Lessons in Chemistry is a novel by Bonnie Garmis, published in 2022. It's the story of Elizabeth Zott, a female scientist in the 1950s who becomes a star cooking show host. This book has everything. Romance, the implication of sex, domestic violence, rape, suicide, sexism, child abuse, and so much more. Now, you would think, looking at this cover, this is a lighthearted scientific romp about a woman who challenges the system and looks great while doing it. No, actually it's not. This is thinly veiled trauma porn without any discernible plot, character growth, or resolution, unfortunately. Seriously, I'm gonna do my best to break this down, but if this devolves into incoherent screaming, it's just because I truly hate this book. Now, please do not leave comments saying that I'm just a hater, I wish I could write books this good and popular, I'm just one of those jealous bitches. Now, I am a hater, but I'm not just a hater, I'm also a book lover. I love to read. I love good books. There are a lot of books that are good for me, not for you, good for you, not for me, because some books are not for all readers. Ranganathan's second law of library science, which I fully believe in, is for every reader their book. I believe that. I do. But some books are bad and actively harmful, rather than holding value for any reader. I am anti-censorship. If you want to read this book and buy a copy for everyone on your street, knock yourself out. I'm just saying that I believe this is a bad book, and you do not have to agree with me. Disclaimer aside, I really cannot understate that this book is popular not because it's good. It was chosen to be popular. A lot of people don't know about publishers is that they truly select which books will do this well, and it's based on how they allocate their marketing budget. Established authors are all well and good, but some publishers will find a book they can push because it's commercial or it plays into a trend. So I'm not saying the hype for this book is entirely artificial, but it needs be remarked that I have read about 100 books a year for the past 10 years, and this one wouldn't even make the top half. And I have read some stinkers. So what is it that I hate the most about this book? Take a number. I would say the most egregious crime is that there's just no characterization. It's like the Star Wars prequels. If you can't talk about their clothes or their jobs, you really can't describe the characters. We'll start with our two romantic leads, Elizabeth and Calvin. She's beautiful, he's an uggo, they're both insanely smart, and they both love science. For both of them, their main character trait is being traumatized by their childhoods. And I mean, who isn't? But I have a personality, I have hobbies, shut up. Elizabeth is traumatized by her upbringing. Her parents were fire and brimstone preachers and con artists. Their bigotry caused her gay brother to end his life. And something that you think might shape a character's life or change them as a person and is literally never brought up again, just mentioned once. Wow. This is great representation and characterization. We're killing it. Elizabeth is also brilliant and mostly self-educated. Calvin grew up in an orphanage after his adoptive parents and unborn sibling perished in an accident. Being ugly and awkward, he was not adopted a second time and was raised in an abusive children's home. He is also brilliant and manages to become incredibly successful at a young age, despite his disadvantaged upbringing. Elizabeth and Calvin fall in love after meeting at work, and he asks her to marry him. She says no out of professional concerns because she does not want her work attributed to him. I actually think this is a very normal and fair thing for a woman of any era because our sexist world so often rains praise on men for the accomplishments of women, particularly the wives of scientists who so often have parts in their work and are not attributed to them. However, Elizabeth does not attempt to even slightly understand why Calvin wants to get married, even though he knows her very well and is familiar with her position on it. He grew up with no one and nothing, and he wants to start a family. Though they both agree about not wanting children, marriage to him represents a united family, which he desperately desires. As someone who's also a feminist, I got married for the same reason, but I kept my name. Marriage has been an inherently patriarchal institution, but it doesn't have to be. And I think Elizabeth refusing to marry Calvin is one of the only actual moments of characterization in the whole book. She's fundamentally a bit short-sighted and not empathetic to other people. I actually would like it if we got more of that, but this is the only time she's complex. They also row, like boats, together, which is a hobby he taunts her into taking part in by saying the women probably aren't strong enough to do it. He knows that will make her do it out of spite, which is, it's not my relationship, but I am judging. Isn't it kind of funny that crew is like a cult at every school? I don't know if this is like a uniquely American thing, But rowing in schools, high school and college, is like a complete cult. Very weird. I mean, I didn't want to get up at 5 a.m, so I didn't do it. Plus, I'm pretty sure if I told my parents, hey, I want to get dumped in the river every week, they'd be like, is something wrong with you? Calvin dies in a bizarre accident involving their dog, which re-traumatizes Elizabeth. Their employer wastes no time in firing her because, gasp, she's pregnant, out of wedlock! This makes logical sense given that it wasn't illegal, and I actually know someone this happened to. The HR lady takes great pleasure in firing Elizabeth because she's a jealous bitch who hates when other women are successful. Elizabeth has a psychic break, turns her kitchen into a laboratory, and eventually has her baby, who she names Madline. Mad. I know people historically, and now in some parts of the United States, yikes, had to carry unwanted pregnancies to term, but it's just so awful in this book. This woman who has never wanted to be a mother then loses the love of her life and is forced to become a parent on her own. I'm not saying she would have had an abortion, which is actually addressed in the text. Abortion wasn't legislated on a federal level in the US until 1973 when Roe v. Wade came down. Maybe it's just me, but I just don't want to read a book about someone who constantly suffers and her only reward is that she's thin, hot, and smart. It's very important you know that Elizabeth's hot, by the way. The book is very focused on how beautiful she is and not like other girls, which is like, okay, I guess literary fiction is still doing this. I think part of my issues with the book is definitely this cover. Like, this cover says, I'm a fun story about science, not, there will be rape in the first 50 pages. There is seriously so much rape and violence against women in this book. This book could give Game of Thrones a run for their money with gratuitous violence. I'm sure there are a lot of women from this era and now who've had experiences like this, but I just do not buy that in the world of the novel there are like 3 good men and 2 good women. Most people in the book are cartoonishly hateful and awful. Sex-based discrimination did and does exist, but not every man is a rapist. Fuck, this book made me say not all men. Ugh. And Elizabeth being so overwhelmingly unfortunate, like, this is Cinderella, right? No one else is seeing this. This is just Cinderella. A beautiful woman without a friend in the world, mistreated and abandoned by all who should love her, and no one can see her true beauty because the 1950s were a hellish landscape of sexism and rape. A lot of people call this book feminist and claim that Elizabeth Zott is like a mascot for feminism. She's a woman in STEM. Are we reading the same book? Elizabeth is a friendless, emotionally unavailable social outcast. Yes, that makes her sympathetic, but just being an impressive woman does not make you a feminist hero. Madeleine Albright was not a girl boss. I'm a bitch. Feminism is about bettering the lives and lot of women in general. I suppose an argument can be made that Elizabeth was trying to empower women with her TV show. But I found her deeply condescending. Her core message was a whole lot of nothing, just, you're smart, use your brain. As though motherhood and housewifery had turned otherwise intelligent women into oatmeal-making automatons. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of being told you're important and valuable, but this portrayal casts American housewives as gullible dummies who need a gorgeous, thin, blonde woman to tell them what to think. Clearly, all women were walking around in a patriarchy haze and needed scientist Barbie to break them out of it. This book is also deeply about class, although not intentionally. Elizabeth is not raised rich, but she's white, educated, and beautiful. She has a home she owns, some savings, and she's able to work only part-time for years while raising her child, along with the unpaid labor of her friend and neighbor. She doesn't worry about the things poor, non-white women worry about. We get this narrative about the women's and men's spheres that are so common to books about gender and sex, but there's no understanding that a lot of women must work and always have. Elizabeth is marginalized because of her gender at work and in her regular life, but she's able to stay at home for years with her child because of her privilege. For a lot of women now and then, that was simply not an option. While the expectation that women stay home is sexist, the necessity to work is also a burden on women who then have to go home and do more domestic labor. Elizabeth simply doesn't understand this because she's so busy being brilliant. She appreciates the labor of her friend and neighbor Harriet, but she doesn't understand Harriet or even attempt to. Harriet is a representation of most women, average-looking, average-intelligent, in an unhappy marriage to a man who doesn't appreciate her. Elizabeth appreciates her friendship and help, but she looks down on her for not being willing to leave her husband, for being religious, for not having the choices that Elizabeth had. Madeleine Zott is another problem. She's 3 and 4 for most of the book, which is ludicrous if you think about the things she's supposedly saying and doing. I was a nanny for like 10 years. I know what 3 and 4-year-olds are like. A precocious child is a weapon to be wielded very carefully in a book, and I think Mad could have worked if not for one issue. She's clearly traumatized, probably by the same things that her mother deals with, the loss of Calvin, societal disdain, and that is never resolved. The book ends abruptly with the conclusion that Elizabeth has her found family, her research job, and her happy ending. Elizabeth is comically mistreated in the scientific world, which has been the lot of a lot of lady scientists. When her sexist bosses decide to hire her back, Elizabeth agrees because she needs the money. Just when their abuse becomes intolerable, the offer to host a TV show falls into her lap through unexpected circumstances. If we look at the wants versus needs of the characters, Elizabeth begins the story wanting to be successful in her field. She wants success, but she needs love. By the end of the book, she has the love of her found family, and she's able to re-enter the scientific field. In fact, her enemies are vanquished, and unfairness in the world is resolved. But the thing is, it isn't. Sure, the scientists who plagiarized Elizabeth's work get fired and embarrassed, and she gets a cool new job. She finds Calvin's biological mother, who he never got to meet, who was a secret rich benefactor. How convenient. Now they have money, and she has a job, and Madline will have a grandmother. But this ending rings hollow to me, because it feels inauthentic. I love a happily ever after. Romance is one of my favorite genres. But the ending doesn't feel happy. Elizabeth, a deeply private person, now has a public profile that she never wanted. Madeline's trauma is never resolved, and we never really get a sense that her and her mother have found a way to communicate with each other. It isn't the central conflict of the book, but we know Elizabeth loves her daughter, but Madline is depressed and giving off a lot of, Matilda-level internal conflict. We never have a scene where Elizabeth has to reckon with how her failure to talk to her daughter about important stuff results in Madline going on an impromptu research field trip project on her own as a tiny child. And then the end of the book is essentially a parlor scene where the lead detective explains it all. Calvin's biological mother shows herself, explains her tragic backstory, because of course she has one of those too. There are, of course, a bunch of contrived coincidences and things that don't fully make sense, because why would it? The end of the book is just as unsatisfying as it's been throughout, with no real resolution. Our heroes triumph, the enemies are defeated, and sexism will be conquered by strong women in STEM. It just rings hollow, you know? I'm just speculating here, but I think the success of this book might have been influenced by the fanfare around The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. It's a STEM romance, and this book made a lot of waves in the romance community online and has inspired many similar works. So why not publish a story about a woman who is a brilliant scientist, but doesn't have, the wonderful love and romance stuff and just does all trauma? Oops, all trauma. The books are not remotely similar, aside from including two scientists who fall in love and featuring sexism in the workplace. But I do think that this book had an influence because it was so overwhelmingly popular. And someone was like, I can have that sweet romance money without actually doing romance? Can I pitch this to a wider demographic while still appealing to romance readers? As a member of the book community, cover language is something that we all know how to read. It's very important. And when you look at this book, it doesn't say literary fiction. It says romance. It says women's fiction. And while this probably does fit in the women's fiction category, and I don't want to fully articulate the whole women's fiction thing right now, I do think this book is necessarily, by its own nature, deceptive. Because you don't know when you open it how very dark it's going to be. Even the flap copy doesn't convey that. The advertising material doesn't say, this book is super fucking dark. And I think that is deceptive in its marketing. Personally, I kind of regret having read this book. I don't read a lot of bestsellers because they inevitably disappoint, and I know what I like. But ultimately, I think this book does not deserve the fanfare. I'm very happy for any author who makes money, but ultimately, I don't think it's a net positive in the world. It feels to me as though somebody wanted to write a book that would fit a very niche audience and would have the trappings of feminism without actually doing any of the work. This is very first wave feminism, parenthesis, derogatory. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I haven't made a lot of videos lately. Take care of yourself and others.